throw stones. Anyway, Stephen Pearce is far too concerned with saving energy by design.
When people first came to Ireland thousands of years ago, they used the materials around them to build shelter from the hostile elements. Even with their basic resources of wood and skins, Stone Age men could design warm, enclosing homes that were pleasing to the eye. As their skills and knowledge grew, the homes they designed became more solid and secure, with heavy posts and beams and reed thatch roofs. Until recent times, each new home was made from the very land it was built on, literally part of the landscape.
My grandfather bought the house 110 years ago. He was newly married, bought this house and a few acres of land from his cousins, James and Margaret McGee, who were emigrating to America. And the following year, my grandfather's first child was born on the 18th of September 1888. His name was James and he was my father. So my father was born into the house as my sister and myself were born into the house.
Margaret Gallagher has chosen not to connect her 300-year-old cottage in County Fermanagh to the water and electricity systems. She prefers to keep an intimacy with her surroundings.
We're only 28 miles as the crow flies from the Atlantic. The prevailing westerly wind wrecks the thatch. I have the birds, you know, the robins, the sparrows, all the other birds who nest in the roof. And they are damaging, but still they're an important part of the house. I have a strange relationship with the birds. I scold them in the morning and I feed them in the evening. So they know they're quite safe, you know, depending on my mood. But 6 years would be a maximum life of a thatched roof.
Traditionally, a whole family would be crammed into 3 tiny rooms. Each room had a clearly defined function.
The upper room in my time served 3 purposes. It was a room where the priest came to visit with my father and all the neighbours who came in to partake of the sacraments. It was a room where the Americans were brought, or the Yankees, when they came long ago. And the third function, and the one that I would remember most, is that it was used for waking the dead person of the house. My father and my grandparents were all waked in the upper room. It's also where I sleep, so it's still carrying on in a very important function. The kitchen is the most important because it has the fire, it has the flag floor with the fire on the actual floor, the floor continuing outside underneath the door to allow for drainage. The fire is the important factor in keeping a house like this alive. The timbers on the house are so old. I mean, the house is over 280 years old. And the timbers have a creosote-like coating of soot on them. And if the fire went out for a long period, the soot would start to melt and the timbers would wilt and you'd have a capsized roof. It's the use of indigenous resources at its best. And I think if people looked at indigenous resources and see how they can be utilised into something living, something as strong as this. I mean, can you see the modern houses now? Will they be around in 280 years' time? With the only replacements a door and 3 windows? The house to me is stability, it's solitude, And most importantly, it's my security, because I'm at one with the house. I was born into it, so it moulded around me, and I developed from it. It's my private patch. I can be alone with myself and I can do what I like here. I think I've got something to be envied by people who assume they have everything. My tranquility and my contentment with my lot, I think that is enviable. It's my answer to living, it's my answer to simplistic living and to happiness, to contentment. Home is where you belong. It's you, it's of you, it's for you. It's a place to receive your friends. It's an open door, as this house always has hosted and boasted an open door. It's home, and I don't think there's any nicer word than home.
Overlooking marshland near the sea in East Cork, the potter Stephen Pearce has taken the traditions of natural building to make a new home that looks deceptively old.
It was built in 1973. It was based on an old Irish cottage. The shape, if you can visualize that, with a thatched roof without the dormer windows, the chimney is the old traditional shape. What I then wanted to do was say, take this romantic vision and say, I wonder, could this be brought into the 20th century? I wondered, by having no windows or doors in the north side, by having underfloor heating, by having insulation in the roof, which wasn't done in Ireland in those days, double glazing, all those things, whether in fact you could translate a 200-year-old idea into something of this century that was relevant and made economic sense.
But Stephen defied tradition by translating the kinds of homes he knew as a child into a new type of space.
The house would have been low to start off with, a thatched roof, a single story, going from about 8 feet up. Then, as the family increased, they always lifted the roof about 4 feet. They put in a floor at this end of the house, facing the fire, and the children would sleep upstairs and the parents would sleep downstairs. And then later on, they would add the piece behind the fireplace for the granny to stay, and because she had arthritis, her bed would have always been backing against the fireplace. The first extension we put on wasn't the conservatory here, it was the tower, and the tower is about 15 feet from the house. And I built that the first time I got married, and it was called the breeding block. And I had the idea that you put the kids out there, you don't have anything to do with them, and life goes on as normal in the main house. As any married person knows, this is fantasy. It's been great fun building this tower. As I started to build it, I really wanted to go up and up and up, because I became fascinated by the way the landscape changes as you go up. And indeed, if there weren't planning restrictions, I think it might have ended up as a 7-story tower leaning nicely in one direction. And this is my bedroom. I love wood, as you can see. I probably should have been a carpenter, and I love the gold work of Patrick Scott. I like a room to be an empty space. I like nothing except me and white walls, and so I always like to try and put a big cupboard like these, so that all the junk is just stuck in there, and when you close the door you pretend there is no junk. I call this the tea house. It's really a bird watching house, and it's been built because as the business grew and grew, I just wanted somewhere where I could go. There's no television, no phones, nobody knows when I'm here, and it's just a notional idea of Japanese architecture. You know, sliding doors mean shoji, a square space, the cedar wood ceiling so that you get the relaxing smell of the cedar wood, having the roof coming out a long way outside and having it on stilts. It's a very spiritual room for me. I'm not a religious person at all, but spiritual I am. I think very internationally, and as you'll see, I plastered the walls using the same technique as in the Irish cottage effect for the house. I'm always trying to unite cultures. in my architecture, some people say, you've drawn from the Greek tradition or from the Arab tradition, or some people say it's very Irish, and really it depends where you're coming from. It's a living thing, design. I think that too much pre-thought is inclined to sterilize. I think some of the wonderful old medieval towns, you see the twist and turn, and you think, how did anybody design that? I'm sure they didn't. You know, somebody was having a row with their neighbour, so the wall had to turn a little early, or somebody was afraid of somebody seeing them in their knickers upstairs, so they put the window at an angle. And I'm sure it's always that sort of practical thing that did this wonderful organic architecture that I personally like very much.
Ordinary concrete blocks lie beneath the natural skin of Stephen Pearce's home. Most homes today are built from mass-produced materials. But even though Caroline Akiboy and Simon Connolly have made a home of steel and glass, they have tried to empathise with the natural surroundings in West Cork.
At the moment we're standing at the entrance level. You've just walked across the bridge, which picks up the higher level at the top of the drive on this fairly steeply sloping site, looking out due south to the sea here. And if we look at the orientation of this, the spine that actually supports the whole of this upper level is aligned due north-south. We're standing now underneath an A-frame which actually carries the whole of the southern end of this upper level. The northern end is carried on a sort of ladder mast. And here we just go out and enjoy the view.
We didn't want to interfere too much with the land as we find it, so we lightly touched down lightly where we needed to. The columns sitting lightly. That way we could combine the joy of being in the landscape with an enclosure around us.
In effect, we're living in a test bed, and we're inflicting all the experiments that we would never inflict on our clients, on ourselves, and that is very much to do with the energy system. It's obviously a passive solar house because all this glass lets in an enormous amount of heat when the sun's shining. Even on a bright day with overcast, you get a lot of heat actually radiated from the clouds. That's all useful heat that goes into the space, into the floor. It's a single glazing. It's actually contrary to all the conventional wisdom, because by the time you add this insulating layer to it, it's almost academic whether you've got double or single glazing behind it, because 90% of the insulating effect actually comes from the quilt. This material is actually made out of recycled lemonade bottles. It's what you get in an ordinary duvet.
It's very much like a person. When you're very warm, you throw off all your clothes, and when you're very cold, you wrap yourself in your coats and your overcoats and so on, so that you could keep very, very warm. So the same idea we used here.
When they first bought the site, Caroline and Simon lived with their children in a treehouse, inspired by a boat design. The techniques of ship and bridge building have been adapted in their new house. Like a bridge, the house is suspended. The whole structure weighs a relatively modest 14 tons because the walls are made of glass.
We felt that what we wanted to do was interpret our original conception of living in the landscape, touching the ground very lightly, enjoying maximum transparency with the flexibility of being able to screen ourselves off when the weather demands. And this is a very direct interpretation of that conception.
There is an element of it that's also cultural. I come from a culture where the idea of space and uses are interlinked, but no, not always fully defined by walls. To feel part of the landscape around us, it's very important to us, and to the children as well. They like the idea of being able to run out, and when it's not favorable, they'll sit indoors and still watch the landscape.
It'll never be finished. We go on learning until the day we drop, and then somebody else will hopefully take it on, and it'll keep evolving. It will certainly go through a lot of transformations as the family grow up and move away, and then we'll keep on playing with it. It's our toy.
The architect Paul Leach has conducted no less radical an experiment in the house he has built for the Donnellan family in County Tipperary, an attempt to make a home that breathes life from its immediate surroundings.
When Jim and Christine Donnellan approached us, they were really in love with this place. They had bought the property, which includes this 1850 or thereabouts cottage with a link and then a 1960s pretty typical bungalow type extension. They needed more space, and they were aware that several things about the extraordinary site weren't being fully utilised. You have these two very strong forms, hard to the street in the typical Irish vernacular way. So what suggested itself was a third shape, cumulatively stepping up toward this wonderful group of trees. And that's where the cone came from. Instead of a rectangular, triangular shape, the idea of making a holistic, humming, centralized shape grouped around the water and receiving this wonderful south light. So within the cone, the teepee, you have this gesture with these solar storage walls which just soak up the winter sun. This mass storage wall here is picking up the energy on a straightforward absorption basis. The floor, which is deliberately a dark tone in Liscannor flag, which is a marvellous, fairly local material, is absorbing, because of its dark surface, the energy directly. In synergy with that is the whole idea of picking up this thermonuclear reaction we call the sun, which is pouring into this space, and it's been received like a baseball glove receiving a ball, all of this incredible energy. If you look at air systems, we're taking the fresh air in deep winter, the sort of harsh conditions we had this winter, and we're taking the air in through these intake points here, which have an insect filter. This air goes under the paving, which passes in then to the sun space. So in winter conditions, there's a preheat of the air in this sun space, which then is gently taken into the living space. And that air is exhausted through this turning aspirator at the top of the cone.
The naturally warmed air from below circulates within the house and reduces the need for fuel-fed heaters.
We made this whole space around this well. This well existed on the site and really prompted the making of the sun space around the well. And so the natural flow of water here, apart from the enjoyment of it in the space, is a beautiful sound and a beautiful movement in this serpentine mosaic channel. It's irrigating this deep planter, which is open down through to the natural ground. And then it's been given back to the natural system through the canal, which runs right on to the lake.
Beneath the ground, copper tentacles reach out to the nearby lake and draw yet more warmth from the water to heat the house. Paul Leach's intention is to connect one system to another so that the house is as close as possible to being self-sufficient in its use of energy.
So we're coming up now into the den or study, which is intended as a home office with an internet computer set up here. And this is within the Tromol system. This is the principal stack taking the heat from the wood-burning stove below. And interlinked with that is the whole solar energy system of taking the warm air from the high level in the sun space through a very low energy fan here, which is powered by a tiny solar cell outside. This is storing energy during the day using photovoltaics and passive solar. Come nighttime, when this system obviously is not working, you simply throw a baffle here in the duct and open this through, and all of that heat comes back out of the floor into the space. And this is all acting in conjunction with this wonderful tree, which in winter, as today, is allowing as much light as possible in. You're getting boosted reflected light and wonderful light effects from the water. Whereas in summer, the deciduous tree and leaf will give you some merciful shade in this space, so that all of these natural cycles are working together to give you a comfortable home. And I think the tribute must be paid to the man who made this. Christy Cormac, who is a local builder, spent long hours getting this together. Using craft skills in building, which are enormously valuable and not enough treasured in the building sector as it stands. Now, much of what is exemplified here in hopefully an interesting and exciting way is also available in a different form language, that must be said. So the techniques that are shown here can be replicated in much more conventional building.
For most of us, there is no possibility that we could afford to live in a purpose-built testbed. But Louise and Herbie O'Rourke live on a conventional housing estate, and yet they still have the chance to experiment.
We spent about 18 months in total looking around, trying to find the right house for us. And we saw every possible combination between big houses and small houses in different areas and so on. And this one, just the minute I saw it, I thought, this is what I want, this is for me.
The O'Rourkes have chosen to buy an energy-efficient home, plugged into the sun and heavily insulated. Theirs is one of 6 solar houses in Dublin's Coolock district.
Basically what we have here is how we deliver the energy to the house. We have got air ducts which come all the way down from the attic, so you can get the solar heated air which will come out through the front duct hole there, and then we take air back out of this room. This is a living room, and that air is taken out of the house. So we, as I say, we have air coming in, we have air going out, but we recover 70% of the heat of the air that we take out of the house.
There's an ambience in the air, it's fresh, it's clean, and it's solid. And it's hard to put a price on that. If you feel comfortable in a place, when you go into a house and you just know it's right for you, you can't really put a price on that. So maybe we are a bit eccentric.
I think when people hear as well that we're living in a solar house, they kind of raised eyebrows. What do you mean by solar house in Ireland? Doesn't make sense. But I think when we explain to people what it's all about, and then they understand.
Hidden in an upstairs cupboard is a heating system which sends warm air to every room, fueled by the sun on bright days and gas when it's overcast.
Obviously, during December, you're not going to have an awful lot of solar energy available, and during that time, you're going to use the gas boiler for probably 7 or 8 hours. But as soon as you get to the good weather, you're relying much more and getting much more energy from solar.
Because it's so energy efficient and environmentally friendly, we feel that's what interests us, and it works for us. It might not work for everybody else, but it works for us.
This is a demonstration project to show that it can be done, and it can be done at a reasonable cost, and that it will sell, and that people will buy these houses and say that they are better than the houses they lived in before. Because again, what people would not understand, generally speaking, in Ireland is that you can utilise things like solar energy in Ireland to give you a low energy and a reasonable cost house.
But as far as the actual house itself goes, I mean, there's no way we're going to find a better house than this anywhere.
We couldn't have made a better choice.
And the hard work and design continues tomorrow evening at 8 in our house. Next week at this time, how technology offers benefits to the Aran Islands community by design.
Gloucester.